Welcome to this episode of Midlife Men with me, Philip Briscoe. Today, I'm joined by Paul. Paul's been very open on social media, especially LinkedIn, talking about his mental health struggles, and has had quite an amazing result. So, welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's really nice to be here on my first podcast. And yeah, I've kind of been blown away by the response, so I'm just happy to help anybody who's going through midlife struggles.
Do you want to take us back to when things started to happen? You know, what happened, and were there any underlying causes that you could point to?
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint when it actually properly started. I think it's been several years where I've been feeling a bit like things are not quite right, a bit uncertain. And yeah, so I was working at a particular company for 15 years. I thought it was, I'd effectively gone from school, from A-levels into an accountancy training, felt like this was the path, this was the answer. So it was like, right now, and that started to become more successful. And I found myself, leading the finances for a construction company. And it was exciting for a period, but I think, over the last several years, it just felt like I was living a bit of a lie. I think that was the biggest thing I found. I was living a life I didn't really want to, and there was a lot of factors within that where it was like, is this normal? Is this what we're supposed to do? And I assumed it was. I thought it was a case that you're supposed to put on a show, obviously at work. You're supposed to, be all about status and chasing that material wealth and stuff. So I think, it was a kind of thing where it just didn't, there were certain things that were happening at work that didn't sit well with me, but it never really clicked that there wasn't something right. So what happened in this company is that the chance to take voluntary redundancy came up. So I felt pressure that it was actually something that, it might be a case that I need to move on anyway. And it was an opportunity for me to explore. And because I was having doubts generally about my career and the direction, it was a case of I ended up taking that voluntary redundancy. And that was definitely a big trigger then for more high level of depression and a realization that I was hunting for something else.
And how else did it sounds like it was a fairly slow burn then over that time. Were there things that you noticed, before you took voluntary redundancy, were there things that you noticed in yourself that were different?
Yeah, I was getting frustrated quite easily. I tend to have a short fuse anyway, and there was more instances of anger, of not being content, a lot of questioning my own value, and the value I brought to work and to the world, essentially, on a bigger scale. So, and I guess it just manifested itself as there was generally a cloud there, and it was that cloud was getting heavier and bigger over time, and then that was magnified when there was the added pressures of a change of job and things like that.
Did you talk to anyone? Did you hide it from people?
I definitely hid it. Yeah, I was definitely not at that point being realistic or showing my true self to people. I've kind of, over the years, I've dropped in and out and seen different types of counsellors, therapists, just to understand a bit more about me and find answers. And I think that's generally what I'm finding now with a therapist, is that I'm somebody who wants answers and I want knowledge and stuff. So there was always an element of exploring why I felt like I did what I wanted, but I never quite understand why I was doing that, but there was elements of a bit of anger management when I was younger, but just, really questioning things out of life. And I think it all stems from when I was younger and being brought up, and we were reasonably well off, and it felt like you were going to chase that material wealth and that status. And maybe I was starting to slowly realize that wasn't the answer for me, but I didn't quite realize it.
Do you think you took the wrong career path? Do you think you just followed what you thought you should do? But actually, accountancy was probably not not the right path.
100%. Yeah. When I reflect back now, I felt I was good with numbers at school, maths, and it was like, right, yeah, I want to do that. But it was mainly about chasing the money and chasing that material wealth, and it was like, oh yeah, that'll work. I also didn't want to go to uni because I was a bit shy at that point. It didn't appeal to me, and there was an opportunity came up to go and be a trainee accountant, so I did it, and I just feel like, I definitely enjoy the finance side of things, and I enjoy, doing elements of it. But it was definitely, I think if I had my chance again and somebody had talked to me about truly what do you want to do, what do you enjoy doing, which is an exercise I've done recently, it would have steered me in a different directions, definitely. And that's why I feel that at some point I'd like to do something with school kids in regards of helping them find their journey, because I don't think there's enough help in that regard. And I think that's a big part of what this midlife challenge becomes about, is a lot of people realize look, I've ended up living a life I don't really want to live, So that's very much what it's become about for me.
Because the corporate world is about making certain people money, shareholders or senior management, but it's perhaps not so much about fulfillment for other people. So did you come to realize that as you started to think, I'm not happy, I'm not doing what I want to do?
Yeah, a big part of it for me was I wasn't getting the fulfillment, because what you find obviously with an accounts as well is that once you've got things working well, it kind of looks after itself, and that's essentially what I now do with SMEs, drop in and out and get it. But it comes to a point where it's like, all right, it's all running okay, and generally the people in the business often don't value accounts and the finance team that much, and it felt like I was just a cog in the wheel at that point. So it's like, even though businesses talk about looking after the staff and fulfillment and things, ultimately the driver it's a capitalist world and it's profits. And it's also people's own wealth, egos, status, and I would sit in board meetings and just be thinking, what am I doing? It's like, we're sat here, these people are bothered about the bonuses, they're bothered about status, but then they will talk about the softer skills and the stuff, but it's like, how much do they actually genuinely buy into that, So yeah, the corporate world for me is what I found works well for me is I've still want an element of that, and I've adapted it in a way that's more satisfying. It's more human, and I'm helping people on with the softer skills as well, rather than it just being a big PLC, that you can get lost in. So yeah, there's a definite adaptation learning from that.
Well, I've talked to lots of people about this topic. And I think generally, the advice I've had talking to other people is, if you're working for a corporate, take what you can from it for yourself, but it's not everything. Don't make it your life. You need to have something outside of that isn't just work, because ultimately everyone's CEO down is dispensable. And I think that having worked in corporations for 25 years, I think that's very true, actually. I think that's quite an accurate approach that people should take to protect themselves, really.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing you get is people learn to do that. And it becomes, you just focus on yourself and look after yourself. And that becomes to the detriment of, the business and yourself in that business, because you start to lose interest. And I see it all the time. And that's why working with SMEs just feels so much more satisfying. These are family run businesses, or their own, their lives and they're massively dependent on the success of these smaller businesses. So, that's that human to human interaction is a lot more authentic at that point.
So just going back to your experience, so you took voluntary redundancy, and then you were saying that your, depression got worse. What happened then? Did you get to a tipping point or a crisis point?
Yeah. So that, I went into a couple of other jobs just for a short term. Again, didn't feel it was right. And there was mornings when I was going to work and I'm like, I don't want to go. I just don't want to go. And I would feel very emotional. So it was that cloud was always there in the morning as soon as I woke up, when I was yeah, during the day, anything. It was always there, and because that was there, I always wanted to escape. It was like, how do I escape from this? And one of the ways that very quickly came to me was I was regularly having suicidal thoughts. So it was especially in the bad moments when perhaps I've reacted or, I've had a drink and stuff, like it was like, it just seems like the easiest way, So, and it became quite normal for me to have those thoughts, something that I wouldn't normally share with people, at the time. I felt quite sad because of it, because of the feeling. I felt very lonely, in my house. I've got 2 kids and a wife, but I would often hide away from them, even when it was about. I was lonely because people didn't understand. It was like I didn't have somebody to talk to who understood. And it's like, obviously you can't put it on your kids. And my wife is somebody who doesn't deal well with it, and she doesn't want to. She doesn't get heavily involved in the emotional side of things, which is fine. But it was like, I just knew that they didn't understand. And there was often times I would say to myself, I'm on my own. So even my friends, who were good, some of them going through similar things, they'd want to give me advice, or, sometimes I just wanted to be heard, so I think that became a bit of a tipping point for me when I found that I was regularly hiding from my family, I wanting to sleep more, and having the regular suicidal thoughts. And I think there was one, the thing about the suicidal thoughts is because I had a family, I didn't feel that was something I could do. It wasn't a realistic escape. There was also the thing where it was like, I didn't know what that entailed and how, and I didn't want the pain of it, So it was like, there was a couple of instances where I was out and about, and I was on this bridge, and there was a sign on the bridge of advertising Samaritans, and I looked over the bridge, and I just thought, could I jump off this bridge? And at the time it was like, I don't think I could, just out of fear, So it made me understand that some people, must get into a really bad place that doesn't become a factor that stops them, and thankfully I had factors like that and my family. But in a way, I started to look for easier ways out. It was one time when I was having a bad time. I haven't been running regularly for a long time, and I was like, I'm just going to go for a run, and I'm going to run until my heart stops. And it was something that I wanted to find a way out that would mean my family would be all right. I'd have health insurance. I just died while I was running, and it'd be, it's not something I have to do to myself. So I just kept running and running and running. And I went out and did 10K run that I hadn't done in a long time. And it was kind of like in the hope that, my body would give up, and so it was like, yeah, when there was moments like that, and I was thinking, and I was being touchy with my family, that they were the moments, and obviously I'm getting emotional now because they were the moments where it was like, yeah, you just feel really sad and you just don't know of a way out, So that was ultimately where I felt like I needed to do something different.
So you realise that was not a sustainable way of living. Often I've spoken to other men as well, and they've said it wasn't that they wanted to die, they just didn't want to live the life they're living and the way they felt. And it was this confusing set of, emotions.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. It's like, I just don't want to live this life anymore. And it feels like there is no, easy answer, quick fix. But I'm being somebody that always questions a lot and needs answers. I was investing a lot of time in reading and things like that and trying to find other ways of joy, but nothing was clicking, But it very much is, you just want to escape somehow, and for me then escape also became, I want to go out in nature. I want to go and just be in a hut in the middle of nowhere and then I've escaped the real world, So whatever way it was to be defined, it ultimately was escape that, this life, this cloud, this feeling. Yeah, definitely.
So what did you do next then? What was the start, the spark of your, I guess you could call it, road to recovery, or however you want to describe it?
So yeah, I was doing a lot of reading. So there was certain books that I quite liked. So there was Eckhart Tolle, his book A New Earth and The Power of Now. So I was trying to explore a lot about that, of mindfulness and being in the moment. And it resonated with me, the book about A New Earth, about egos and the corporate world and getting out of that. So all of a sudden I was starting to find, maybe there's a different way to find joy. There's a different way to be happy and to live your life that doesn't revolve around chasing whatever, a goal, and that actually you can try and live now. But I was struggling with that. It made sense to me, but it's something you really need to practice. And I thought, I saw a counsellor for a short period of time. That was done virtually, and it was about CBT, and it was okay to a degree, but I didn't feel it quite worked for me. So I was doing a bit of exploring, and I came across somebody who does psychotherapy. And this is what I'd always wanted. I wanted somebody who was a proper psychologist who, really analysed what was going on. And I found Amy, she's called, and she's a psychotherapist and life coach, unfortunately local to me. And I inquired with her, and that was ultimately the best thing that I did, was finding a good quality therapist. And yeah, so from the point of realizing I needed to do more, it was very much about working with Amy, exploring the life coaching aspects, the wellness coaching, and exploring who I am, and what I want to do. And long story short, that was a lot about me learning what my passions were, the stuff that I should have done when I was younger, and, went through some steps to explore what my personality type is, what my passions are, what I enjoy, what I get lost in. And then also with Amy, just, one of the biggest things she's done for me is, for one, it's a safe space that you can go and talk to somebody. It's about you. If you find a good therapist that you connect with, that's great. That you can just talk. But the biggest thing she's done is she's given me permissions in a variety of things, but ultimately permission to prioritize me and live my life. It's like she sat in those sessions and gone, I give you permission to do that, and that's something that has made a massive difference, where it's like, as a husband and dad, often it's like, I need to do this. And it was like, she's like, well, for one, your kids are happy that you're just there, you don't have to do everything, and it was like, that was a bit of a revelation for me, that I'm able to now start prioritizing myself. So yeah, that was very much like the beginning of working towards a road to recovery.
Do you think, in your opinion, can you fix yourself? Can you read books? Can you align things in your own head? Or do you think, you need to have somebody else to help do that, a professional or just somebody who's helping you?
I think maybe it's comparable to anything where it's like, it's easier to have a specialist helping you. It's very hard, I think, to fix yourself reading books, because again, you need the massive power that you get from having somebody who's a therapist and a professional, is they'll narrow down into, things that they see. And it's like, well, what about this? Every time I go to a session, at the end of it, I've got this newfound clarity. But also, it's just because it's an emotional thing, I think people massively benefit from having somebody there who's on their side. It's like, you'll have people close to you who care for you, or even friends who care for you, but they're living their own problems, their own lives, and they're not trained as well. But it's to have somebody for an hour or whatever is absolutely focused on helping you for that hour is invaluable. So I think, yeah, if you're somebody who likes to read and likes knowledge and likes to find answers, I think it's good to read. But one thing that a therapist or whatever can tell you is that you don't need to find the answers for everything as well. So it's going to these therapy sessions is just somebody saying, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do this. You can give yourself a break. And when you hear it from other people, it's more powerful because we all know, I think, that we're a lot nicer to other people than to ourselves. So if you're reading a book and you're going, right, I need to do this, it's very hard for you to then go and allow yourself and give yourself a break and stuff. It's like, no, I'm going to let myself. But if somebody else says that, I think it's more powerful. So, yeah, I think there's definitely value in working with somebody else.
What advice would you give to someone listening to this podcast who, feels the same as you? What you're saying is really resonating with them, but they don't know either how to go about getting a therapist or they're just fearful of it. What advice would you give them?
I think, yeah, because ultimately, is try and put yourself out there authentically. And that's what I did on my post on LinkedIn. It was my kind of way of putting myself out there. And I was fearful about it, and I was very honest about what I'd been going through. And the response I got is from people, directors, CEOs and stuff saying they're going through the same thing. And it's like, I think they're just not feeling comfortable to put themselves out there. So it's like, I think there are a few things that make a big difference. And it's like, if you can talk more, talk more authentically about what you're feeling, be honest, be vulnerable. It's what I'm realizing on LinkedIn is that's just a community of human beings who are vulnerable. I, look at it as like all these successful people, and it's like they've all got problems, so be vulnerable. I personally, I would say explore a psychotherapist or a wellness life coach, because they make a massive difference, and you can do it virtually, you can do it face to face. You can search on the internet, for different people, but they're one of the biggest impactors in just being able to have that safe space and get you out of there. So and they will allow you to be you, and to prioritize you. And if you feel like you are living a life that's not you, to a degree, there is a certain switch where you can just go, I'm not going to live that lie anymore. And I know there are different levels of lie, that people are faced with, because of cultural norms or whatever. But it's like, as much as you can live authentically, it makes a massive difference. So, and, the thing about me reading the Eckhart Tolle stuff about the ego is like, that my ego gets me in a lot of problems. It's like that gets me angry. It gets me kicking off, or upset about what people think and stuff. So again, exploring things like that, where you could take the ego out of it and just try and be you. And it's like, right, I'm going to take my ego out and I'm going to put myself out there. And the thing is, it's like, I started taking antidepressants maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I'd avoided it up until that point, just because I didn't want to be dependent on them. And I wanted to try and tackle it, a more natural way. But there was an instance where I smashed a cup in the living room, and I was like, I can't be feeling like this all the time. And so I started taking a low dose of them. And at first, I've not really told people, but then I started openly admitting about it. Again, it was just a weight off my shoulders. It doesn't matter, and there are a lot of people on these tablets, but it's just one tool that you can use to help, and as my therapist was kind of saying was, it can help, but you just don't want to be too dependent on it. So I think, overall it's just try and live your life authentically, be true to yourself, and definitely explore seeing a psychotherapist would be my advice.
Well, it's through people like you, showing that vulnerability in an environment like LinkedIn that helps with this, with breaking down the barriers and the stigmas and all those phrases that we use. But interesting that you had so much direct feedback goes to show that there's still quite a long way to go as well. And this podcast is set up, it's called Midlife Men, not because it's exclusively, every topic's exclusive to midlife men, but actually we are in a group that I think is still not really able to share and still have these perceptions or I guess results that they're looking to achieve based on environment and how they grew up. So I think what you're doing is incredibly important. If not a bit disappointing that you got that level of feedback, because it means there's still a lot of people out there that aren't feeling the same. And so you talked earlier about in psychotherapy, kind of relearning, I guess, what you wanted to do, what makes you happy, perhaps from a career perspective. So this goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, which is, wanting to work with young people to help them make that decision. So do you think if you'd have had that sort of advice, your experience might have been different? You might not have had the journey that you did have.
Yeah, I think there's a big factor there that if I'd had somebody explaining to me, what life can be about rather than it being about, chase that great career, the answer is at the end, of the rainbow, that when you get to a certain financial stability and wealth, life's good. And I think I would have had a much more satisfying life up until now if somebody had explored that. And, what I'm now looking at, I continue to be a virtual FD for these SMEs, but I'm adding on wellness coaching and personal training because I very much have an interest in that, and focused at midlifers. And I think if somebody had managed to unlock the realization that I want, to help people in the mental health space, I think I would have felt so much more alive for so much longer. And I think that's the difference. I felt throughout my career like there's just a question. It's like, it doesn't quite feel right, and so I think there's definitely an education piece about the world, the capitalist world, and not being ego driven, and I think this is the thing about the mental health just generally in society is that we're all brought up and trained at school. My daughter's school is seen as a bit of a business school, and they're encouraged to wear suits when they get in sixth form and stuff. And I just think, is that the only way? And I think it's more about creating community and less competition and helping each other. And I took it to an extreme where I used to be a massive England fan, for example, and I'd go and watch England playing. Whereas now I'm trying to embrace whether they win or lose, it doesn't matter, and I get caught up in it. And I'm a Formula One fan and I get caught up in that, but I've kind of realized the joy you can get from enjoying other people's success, and it's like, it's a natural joy. So I think if there'd been somebody at school who taught to me about these natural ways that you can get joy, these, enjoying now and not chasing something at the end and stuff, I think I would have been in a much better place. And I think a lot of midlifers would be. I think it's a massive thing that we're sold a bit of a lie when we're younger, and we end up following something on the trust that, I've been to school, I've got all these qualifications or whatever, and it's like, I'm set up for life. Or, thankfully people who go to university have a great time generally, so at least they have a great experience. But if it wasn't that and it was just right, you're going to be getting set up, I think we're setting up a lot of people to hit midlife. So, I think in that regard, society and the way that we are a capitalist world just is geared up to this. And so ultimately, it's like for me now, I want to use my qualifications and I want to build on the PT and wellness to help midlifers, because I very much feel the pain that they will be going through. But I want to, at some point, to try and impact the younger generation to get a message out that there is another way.
And I guess you're a good example of, it's never too late. If you're not happy, it doesn't feel right. It may not be instant, but you need to take ownership, and you can.
And I think that's the thing about, I followed somebody, a career change expert, great guy, and he talks about having faith in the process and not worrying about it. We'll find out your superpower and the answer at the end. And it's like, there's just a lot of people in that position, definitely, who are having career changes late on. And again, it's just another sign that I see that we don't quite get it right so many times,
Yeah, there's no law that says you have to work 8 till 6 for 4 years.
No, that's it. There's different ways, definitely.
So one of the things that you said when you were feeling, depressed and going through the experience you went through is you didn't share any information. You didn't share that with anybody, your friends or family. What advice would you give to people listening to this who are married to or know or work with or who, are siblings of men that they know something's not right, that you can see from the outside if somebody is not happy? What advice would you give to them to try and help? Because it must be frustrating, especially if somebody won't talk to you, to know what to do, and probably quite stressful as well.
I think the thing is from my experiences, they just want to be heard. That's the biggest thing is it, as much as you can, is being there to hear them, to listen to them. And I would say it's not about trying to fix them, because I would have friends, giving me advice, and like I say, there was times where I don't want the advice because, and it's that element of feeling on your own. The reason I felt on my own is because, for different reasons, my wife couldn't help me, but she wasn't hearing me either, and she didn't understand. My mates who weren't going through it, perhaps would be like, well, why don't you just try this or whatever. But if they really just listened and I felt like they were listening, I think there would be more of a connection. And there was a friend of mine who was going through something similar, and we would meet up and we would be like, oh yeah, I'm feeling that, I'm going through that. And we would talk about suicidal thoughts, and, it was just, and to, funny situations where we're studying Bakewell in a Bakewell shop, and we're just like, should we carry on talking about suicide while we're in here and the ways you can do it? And it was like, it was just really nice to talk to somebody who got it, whereas if you mention suicide to your partner or whatever, it's like, it's a big word. So I think for the people who are close to them, and I had a woman who reached out to me after the post and said, I struggle, my husband won't get help. And so you can't force them to see a therapist. But I think you can perhaps suggest ways or whatever, but I think any way you can help your partner or whatever prioritize themselves, and enable them to live an authentic life I think definitely helps. And, and encourage them to reach out to strangers. Strangers, the people who have reached out to me who didn't know me, they found it a lot easier just to talk to me. So it's like, if in any way you can get a stranger to connect with the person going through, I think they'll find it a lot easier to talk to that person. And it's, ultimately, I just don't force them. Be a connection to them as much as you can. I'd say, all those kind of things.
So over the course of this podcast, I've spoken to a couple of organisations. One's called the Face It Foundation in the US, which is there to help men with battle depression and also suicidal tendencies. And in the UK, there's an organisation called Tough to Talk, which offers a similar support. So I'll put the links in the description. I mean, Paul, thank you so much for being really open. And I think, people listening who this resonates with will take away a lot from what you just said. So thank you. Thank you.
I hope so. At the end of the day, I guess just to kind of finish, to give some perspective for, there'll always be ups and downs. I feel like the last day or so I've had a bit of a down. At the moment I'm training, doing a PT body transformation to try and get stronger, healthier, for me, and that massively helped. I'm, doing some coaching and wellness coaching training and learning myself, to be a PT. And these are all things that I focused on my new why, my new purpose, and that's there, and it's definitely driving me, and it's releasing me from the cloud. And I feel like I'm working towards an answer. But there are days where it's like I'm suddenly reminded of that cloud, that feeling and stuff, and that's okay. And what I'm learning is to allow yourself to experience them, and as it goes up and down, just to ride it out. And if you can get some help, if you can talk to a psychotherapist in particular, I think that's a massive help. If it helps to reach out to myself or Philip or anybody, please do it, just because there'll be days where it's like, oh, you'll feel it's not that bad. And then there'll be days where it's like, oh, I'm really struggling. Whatever the feeling, it's like, it's just still, it's nice to talk. And, we're quite good at listening because of what we've gone through. So yeah, but thank you for having me. It's been therapeutic to talk it through. So
brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you or someone you know is struggling with depression or thoughts of suicide, there are organisations you can call now. For example, in the UK, you can call the Samaritans on 116 123. And if you're in the US, you can call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. There are also organisations to help men who are battling depression and thoughts of suicide. In the UK, visit the Tough to Talk website, and the US, the Face It Foundation website. Both of those organisations and founders we have done episodes on. Paul also referenced 2 books by Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now and A New Earth, both of which are available to buy at most major retailers. If you have a story to tell and you think your experience would help others, then please get in contact with me either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. Finally, please share the podcast with people you know and with your networks. And if you've enjoyed listening, then please rate or like the podcast to help raise its profile, and we can reach more people who might benefit from the stories shared by my guests.